So Rod, I know when we had our session about 2.5 years ago, and we were talking about those moments that create the sticky story on the Great Barrier Reef, the thing that really transforms the way people's day goes. You had a lot to say. Have you got an experience that you can share with us today? A wow moment that you're creating in your business?
I mean, I think obviously we're a dedicated scuba diving operator, and certainly from my own personal experiences and what our company provides, it's to me the unique experience of taking people underwater for the first time, where you take the extra dimension, or take people to that extra dimension of actually physically being in it rather than just on it and looking down on it. Yeah. And the first night dive, I think, for people as well, because it's part of the experience we offer. I think, having been a diving instructor 100,000 years ago when I was young, but the experience of bringing people back from their first dive underwater, I think, is a very unique experience. But having said that, relevant to what you were saying before, I mean, that's the experience that can happen in lots of places around the world. It's not particularly unique to the Great Barrier Reef, but it certainly is an experience that I think is a very unique and, I would say, a memorable lifetime experience for most of the people who have their first dive here in this region on the reef, because they're combining the reef experience with a unique exposure to scuba diving. Absolutely.
Alan, maybe as another underwater experience, what are some of the moments that your customers talk about or write about or share when they go to talk about what they had on their day with you?
Yeah, look, so what we do is, for those who know, we do the Sea Walker, and 4 years ago, I got offered a job at Sea Walk, and I turned it down because, well, it's helmet diving. Who wants to go helmet diving? So I turned it down. I came back, and I've been in a helmet once. Yeah. It'll probably be the last time I go down in a helmet, because it's not, for a scuba diver, for an instructor, it's not probably the most interesting thing to do. You're confined. You're in a bubble. But that being said, what we do is we provide a service for people who can't normally go scuba diving. Yeah. So a recent story, we have many stories. I didn't think I'd still be with Sea Walker. I thought it was a temporary thing. But we have many stories from taking blind people down, and they come up, and to see a blind person look at you, well, sorry, not look at you, but facing you, and tears coming down their eyes, or down their face, and the big smile on their face, it's just probably one of the most rewarding things. A recent story that's hit a little bit personal as well is my grandmother came to visit me from Canada, and for the last 30 years, she's always had this look of a concerned mother. Just, you know, oh, do you have enough to eat? Kind of, you know.
Are you wearing a singlet, Alan?
Right? Yes. It's like, oh, are you? Do you have enough to eat? You know, or do you have enough money for food? Are you clothed well? Are you living okay? And in the 15 minutes that we took her sea walking, I've never seen her smile for the last 30 years that I've known her. So there's multiple experiences that we have like this, and these are people that wouldn't normally go scuba diving, or they cannot go scuba diving because they can't swim. Yeah. They're terrified of the water.
Yeah. And that's the difference in shifting the story from a bland description, like we have a diversity of experiences and ways to engage in the reef, to, if you're blind or over 80, you may never have smiled as much as you will today here on the Great Barrier Reef. You won't do that anywhere else in the world. We can do that here for a lot of reasons. We can provide you with the absolute confidence that you can do that on the Great Barrier Reef.
I mean, if I can add one more thing on that, it doesn't stop. So they finish the experience, whether it's diving or it's sea walker. The smiles don't stop. It carries on. So for example, my grandmother, I gave her all the media that we have, all the photos and videos, and so we bought her an iPad, and all she does is sit there with a big smile on her face and just puts it on repeat and watches the same 30 seconds go around and around and around.
Yeah. So, and shares it with everyone who comes to the house.
Well, and the thing is, you guarantee when she goes back to Vancouver, where she's there now, she'll invite all her friends over and she'll brag about how her grandson's, you know, doing this, and she'll show all of them. She took 100 different flyers of her Sea Walker flyers in 3 different languages, so she could give them out to her friends.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. Harriet, have you got one for me?
I always thought 30-minute scenic flights, you know, you go up, you see the reef, it's absolutely beautiful, but I was astounded when we got to the reef. We landed on one of the sand cays, and then took off again. We didn't get out of the helicopter, but we came down and we landed and we took off again. And that's completely unexpected. And it's an experience that even if you're sitting in the helicopter and, you know, oh, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's fantastic, but then all of a sudden, to circle around this sand cay and land is a completely different view on the reef. Yeah. And then to take off again. So that was an experience completely unexpected. Yeah. But when you get back, people have a very different view of the reef. It's not just from the air, they've actually landed and taken off again. So
absolutely.
Different experience.
Thanks very much. Robbie Bashan, I'm going to pick on you. As a person who has to sell the reef in a range of markets, talking to all different types of buyers and experience purchasers, what are some of the stories that you tell when they say, but I can get a reef experience in 20 locations around the world. Why would I choose a moment on the Great Barrier Reef? I can get it cheaper somewhere else. I can still do the Nemo fish and the coral. I can sleep on the water right over the Barrier Reef. Why would I do a Great Barrier Reef experience? What do you tell them?
For me anyway, it's always boiled down to basically one thing, and that's customer service. I mean, reefs are like stages. They're all around the world, but it's the props that go with it. And I think this region has certainly been at the forefront of customer service and experience delivery for many, many years. And yes, there are plenty of reef options around the world, but they don't seem to have that same level of, what's the word, of quality perhaps, of delivery. And I think it's something that Cairns and certainly my time with Quicksilver we're very, very proud of. And I think it was one of the things that separated us from many other operations of similar ilk around the world.
Yep.
Certainly the difference, I think, is very much so. There's lots of other spectacular diving all around the world, but there's not many places where you go to where you get cutting edge safety standards and product delivery combined with the product. I mean, you can go to all sorts of amazing places in far-flung destinations and see lovely stuff, but some of them you want to be taking your own dive gear with you and you want to know what you're doing because you might not come back, sort of thing, you know. So we're at the cutting edge of that, and you've got to see how some of those other operators in other places work to really put that into perspective. And I think that's something that we don't promote enough, but at the same time there's certainly a resistance in the marketplace to scuba diving here based on what's perceived to be over-regulation by the government, you know. And I don't think it really is, but there's a perception, and that's a perception we certainly have to counteract.
So what we want to talk today is about shifting the story, and that's a really good lead-in to how we go about doing that. The idea of an experience is what goes on between your ears when you've got all the other bits of the equation right. The experience is what happens in your mind. The aim of an interpreter is to make the customer think, not to remember what you told them, but to make them think for themselves. And it's stories like the ones that you tell that get our trade thinking about the Great Barrier Reef. We've got to get people thinking about why it is that they have to choose this destination, and that is the power of the experience. You know about the power of social media. I don't need to bludgeon you with statistics on that. The most interesting one I heard recently was Coca-Cola. Their website had 275,000 unique visits. How many friends do they have on Facebook? 25 million. It's a very simple equation. We keep trying to push information to them, and our customers are pulling information from all sorts of sources. So we need to move our story on from push marketing, where we put our story in and say, this is what you need to know about us. And we have to embed that in the delivery so that our customer tells it for us. That's the difference of the environment that we're in. And the aim of the workbook and the aim of this whole exercise is to embed a key story or a key theme, something you want your customer to walk away with, like Rod's just mentioned. The safety plus product element, how you marry that story into everything that you do, not in a way to say, we're over-regulating you, we're going to limit what you do, but to remind them why that is a unique selling point of why they came to the Great Barrier Reef and how they take that and sell that story to others. We've got to make the story sticky. We've got to tell it in a way that gets it to stick. I'll let Sam have one more word on this, and then you and I need to get into a conversation about how we take the big picture of the Great Barrier Reef and turn it into your picture.
If there was one thing I could recommend to an operator in the Great Barrier Reef about meeting and exceeding the aspirations of visitors, I think it would be to remember that what you're marketing and advertising and developing and ultimately delivering is an experience. And, you know, and it pays to think about what goes into an experience. I know a lot of time goes into thinking about the quality of the boat, the ship, the quality of the food and the food service, the attire and the demeanor and professionalism of the staff, and the cleanliness of the toilets, and all those kinds of things that we all know are very important. But it's also important to remember that those things don't constitute the experience. In fact, they really add almost nothing to the experience when you think about it. Oh yeah, they're important, and if you fall short on any of them, if the toilets aren't clean, the food is bad, the staff aren't professional, then of course it will detract from the experience. But if you do all of those at even a very high level of quality, it doesn't add to the experience. Because all the companies are trying to do that, and you could even say that it's not the fish or the corals or what the visitor sees under the water that constitutes the experience. Let me give you an example. I've been on the Great Barrier Reef as a visitor twice. Once was about 9 years ago, and then the second was as recently as about 2 years ago. I'll tell you about the first one. The first trip was about 100 of us. We were on a boat. We went out to the reef as part of a field trip at a conference I was at. When the large group of us arrived at the diving snorkeling platform, we were divided into small groups, and each of us was assigned a guide, probably 4 or 5 guides. And I remember my guide was well prepared. He had laminated colored photographs of the kinds of things we were likely to see, the corals and the fish and other marine animals. And he talked to us about them. He showed us how to look for a giant clam, what to look for and where to look. I remember he gave some of the animals roles. He talked about a vacuum cleaner. These are the fish that were scavengers or algae eaters. And he talked about the sheriff. It was a large predatory fish that the other fish they were very wary of. He talked about invisible fish. He showed us a photograph that had fish in it that we couldn't see. And then he pointed out very carefully the camouflage of those fishes, and he showed us a ring around the eye that was the dead giveaway to see the invisible fish. Now, after this type of orientation, you can imagine when we jumped in the water, we were looking, and we were searching, and we were hoping to spot the kinds of things that the guide had sort of calibrated us to see. And we were making meaning and personal associations with the things. Oh yes, there's the invisible fish. Oh yes, there's the giant clam. Now let's fast forward 7 years to my second trip. Again, there were about 100 of us, maybe a little more, and we got out to the platform. And then after we were all outfitted in our lycra suits and our masks and snorkels, we were just free to jump in the water or get out anytime we want. It was just kind of this sort of, it looked like a bunch of piranhas flipping around in the water from all the snorkels out there. And every one of them was down there seeing the same fish and the same corals. And some of them were probably amazed, and others of them were probably not quite amazed. And then we got out of the water, and we had our lunch, and we went back. You know, what I remember most about the second trip was something that my first guide on the first trip 7 years previously had done. I was able to see the invisible fish again because of what a guide 7 years earlier had told me. And I was able to show my brother-in-law, who was snorkeling with me, a giant clam that day because of the guide that I'd had 7 years previously, but not because of the guide I'd had on the day. I'd say of the 2 trips, the first one was worth far more than we paid for it. And I'd say the second one was worth about exactly what we paid for it. I'd recommend the first one, and I have, but I wouldn't recommend the second one. So there you see in this example the difference between what it means to market, develop, and to orchestrate and deliver an awesome experience for guests. It's not the same as the corals and the fish. It's not the same as the food service and the attire and professionalism of the staff. What matters in the experience that you should be developing and marketing is what goes on between the ears and the minds of every one of those snorkelers once they get below the water. And if I could recommend one thing to you, it would be to hire guides, train guides, and demand that your guides treat every visitor as much as possible as an individual, although the numbers sometimes don't permit individual conversations with all of them. You still need to work as hard as you can to get close to that level of intimacy. And remember that every time a guide looks like he or she has taken a personal interest in the experience that each visitor has, every time that visitor's experience seems to matter to the guide, you'll have done something that will set you apart from the competition. I can guarantee that.